This is my first electric guitar that my mom bought for me for $150 from Union Music in 1994. Because today, we're gonna talk about 5 things that you should be thinking about if you're just starting guitar. I have been getting a lot of comments lately from people saying, Benny, I love your channel, I love your energy, I'm just starting out, what do I do? I know starting an instrument can be a very daunting thing. So I wanted to take the time today to kind of divide my thoughts into 5 different ideas. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about my first electric guitar. I remember being, I want to say 10 or 11 years old, and my buddy Mark Ordung at school brought a guitar in and jammed during recess. And I thought it was the coolest thing. He had this little small amp and he was rocking it. That was the first time I saw somebody play guitar and said, I want to do that. I really wasn't exposed to tons of rock music. My parents listened to classical and a lot of show tunes, so I could sing Fiddler on the Roof, but I didn't know Led Zeppelin. So when Mark showed up and did his Pete Townsend at 11 years old, I said I had to do that. And I begged my mom, I begged her, please buy me an electric guitar. And one day after my piano lesson, she brought me this, a 1992 PV Predator, which she bought for $150, which by the way, I looked it up, that is $311.41 by today's standards with inflation. I remember plugging into my PV Rage 158 amp, this little practice thing, pushing in the little gray button to get the distortion, and just rocking it. I sounded terrible. I didn't know how to play anything, but there was just something super powerful and cool holding a guitar and playing it through an amp. About a week after I got this guitar, I called up Mark Ordung and said, I have the guitar now, we need to jam. And I went over to his house, pulled my trusty PV Predator out and said, I have the greatest guitar ever. Because I was so excited about this, I was convinced it was the best. And that's when Mark pulled out his Gibson Les Paul and said, Benny, you got a cool guitar, that's a Strat. This is a Gibson Les Paul. This is the coolest guitar you can get. I had never seen a Gibson Les Paul. I didn't even know the brand Gibson. And that was the first time ever in my life I had ever thought to myself, I need a Les Paul. And I said to myself, if I got good enough, I'm gonna buy myself a Gibson. And when I turned 13, I bought this Gibson Nighthawk, and it changed my world. And a few years after, in 1999, I took my $150 PV Predator Strat and turned it into a much more valuable guitar. And I brought this backstage when I interviewed everybody at Ozzfest 99. It is signed Slipknot, to Fear Factory, to Black Sabbath. You can see Ozzy Osbourne right here. If you look over here, you got Rob Zombie's autograph, Les Claypool, Sully from Godsmack. Super cool guitar that I made way cooler by getting all these autographs. And one Wayne Static, a really awesome dude, great singer, may he rest in peace, took the time to write Gibson on my PV headstock. How cute, Wayne. And this has remained on my wall ever since. It still has the acoustic strings I put on it when I was 16 years old because I couldn't afford electric strings, and I went into my mom's acoustic case and figured, hey, they're just magnets, that should work. It did, and they're still on here. It's kind of been a testament to a lot of the music I've listened to, and since I got this signed, a lot of the people on this guitar have passed. So I'll take a moment. We have Paul Gray and Joey Jordison from Slipknot, Jeff Hanneman from Slayer, the amazing bass player Chi Chang from Deftones on here, and the incredible, immortal Wayne Static. And I'm so excited to see those guys still touring. They were super nice to me when I was 16, and I really appreciated the fact that Wayne Static not only signed my guitar, but took me around and introduced me to Kerry King and Les Claypool and had me sit down at the table and eat lunch with him because he saw this little 16-year-old pipsqueak wandering around like, will you sign my guitar? And he took me under his arm and he said, Benny, I got you. So thanks, Wayne. That brings me to number 1 on my list. What guitar do I buy? So you had the 2 schools of thought. You had the Les Paul with the humbucking pickups and the set neck, and you had the Fender Stratocaster with the single coil pickups and a bolt-on neck. But a huge difference between 1994 and now is that technology has become so much better so that the options of what you can buy for cheap or as a starter guitar are so much more than when my mom walked into Union Music and they said, here, get your son a Strat. The first thing you want to think about when you're looking to buy a guitar is how serious are you? You can buy guitars for $150, $200. I went online to take a peek at what's available. For $200, you can get an Epiphone Les Paul Studio, an Epiphone SG. You can get a Jackson. The problem is when you buy guitars that are too cheap. I will quote one of the loves of my life and favorite TV shows on the planet, The People's Court, with the Honorable Marilyn Milian. The cheap comes out expensive. The problem is when you get a guitar that's too cheap is that first they probably need a setup, meaning that you will need to bring it to a luthier to adjust everything so that it plays right, so that the action, which is how high the strings are off the fretboard, is low enough where it's not eating into your fingers and that it actually stays in tune. Because when you have a cheap instrument, a lot of the times they don't play well. They don't stay in tune. They fall apart. The cheap comes out expensive. I wanted to go on to Amazon and see what they were selling because I was curious. And I found this generic Strat pack for about $150. 4.4 stars out of 8,700 reviews. Makes you think this thing's probably pretty awesome, right? I don't trust that stuff. The first thing I do when I look at things like this is I go to the 1-star reviews because I want to know about the people that had the problems with this stuff. From Jill, do not buy, was quoted $90 to repair 6 days out of warranty. We bought this guitar for my daughter's birthday in May. I opted to purchase something more mid-price rather than super cheap, thinking you get what you pay for. However, even though this was more expensive than most, it is extremely bad quality. Well, first off, Jill, $150 is not more expensive than most. That's what my mom spent on a cheap guitar in 1994, about 300 bucks. $150, you're lucky if the thing isn't made of asbestos and children's tears. My daughter played it for about a month, but started struggling to keep it tuned, was getting lots of feedback, and it just sounded overall terrible. We finally decided to take it to a local guitar shop. Once we were there, they said the guitar was put together poorly and the neck was assembled too tight, causing the neck to bow. In order to fix this, we were quoted $90. Yeah, Jill, when you buy a guitar for $150, it probably is put together terribly. Most luthiers aren't even gonna look at your instrument for much under $100. So if you go on Amazon and you buy a $150 guitar, don't be surprised when you're like Jill. Here's another review from the same guitar. Do not buy. Complete garbage. I got this for my daughter for her birthday to give it to her in November. We gave it to her yesterday on November 22nd, and it has quit working today, November 23rd. To say the least, I am not impressed with the quality of this product and would like a refund. They got a day out of that guitar. It's not to say you can't find deals out there. It's not to say you can't find an instrument that's super cheap. But if you are remotely serious and you actually want to learn, if you get an instrument that's too cheap, it's going to play terribly and it's going to inhibit your ability to move forward. And you're not going to want to play it because it's not only going to be hard to play, but when you're constantly going on a tune, you're going to wonder, is that me? When a lot of it's the fact that you're playing a guitar that was cobbled together with metastasized cancer cells. Which brings me to a huge point. There is a law of diminishing returns. The difference between spending $100 on a guitar and $400 on a guitar is huge. The difference between spending $3,000 and $4,000 on a guitar, not as huge. While the difference between spending $10,000 on a guitar and $12,000 on a guitar, someone may not even notice. And in fact, they may even like the $10,000 guitar better. There is a huge, huge difference in quality if you spend just a little more from the start. And in my case, my mom bought me a Strat, and when I continued to play in over a year, I decided to buy myself a higher quality instrument. That Strat was a great start. It felt awesome, it played great, but never did that Strat inhibit my ability to play because of its quality. I just wanted a Gibson because I saw Mark Ordung's Gibson and I needed to have that. When you are looking to get into something, you have to decide how much time and love and passion am I going to invest into this. If you're going to spend $1,000 on a guitar and you're not planning on practicing and you don't really care, you're going to put it in the corner, save yourself the time. But if you're serious, and you really want to learn, save up the money, buy something decent so that you can learn on something that's going to be rewarding, be fun to play, and if you decide you want to keep going, you can have an instrument you can put in your arsenal versus saying, this is such a beginner guitar, throw it away. So while I don't necessarily say that you need to spend tons of money on a guitar in the first place, I do recommend doing it right. And I could spend hours explaining the difference between different guitars, why some are more valuable than others. What it comes down to is that cheap guitars are going to be harder to play on, they're going to be harder to sell, and they're not going to be as rewarding usually as far as sound. So I recommend $500 to $600 to $700 range. Although that sounds expensive, it really isn't. I didn't invent inflation. I went to the grocery store the other day and it was $5.69 for a dozen eggs. Is there cocaine in those eggs? Get the right tools for the job. And if you don't know a lot about it, go to a mom and pop music store. Go to a place like Sam Ash and ask one of their professionals. They want to help you. Save up the money to do it right, take it seriously, And find an instrument that you can genuinely learn on where it's only you that sucks, not the instrument sucking for you. Because I can assure you I suck enough without my instrument being terrible. Number 2, amps. Don't be overwhelmed. Back in the day, you had tube amps versus solid state amps, you had practice amps versus half stack amps. Now you have modelers, you have plugins and Pro Tools, all kinds of ways to get a sound. One of the greatest things with technology is that you can now buy solid state little mini practice amps that have everything you want. They're like iPods. As opposed to just getting a Marshall that sounds like a Marshall, you can buy something like this Boss Katana for 200 and something bucks. It's 50 watts, super loud, comes with all these awesome effects, and then you have a little knob on it that allows you to go from the Brown sound, which is that Van Halen Marshall sound, to the British sound, gives you a different kind of plexi Marshall, to clean sound like some Fenders. So you have this whole group of amps. Blackstar makes one, Fender makes one, Positive Grid. There's all these companies that make these great starter amps that are small, sound huge, have effects, and you can then kind of decide what sound you want. Back in the day, you bought an amp, it had that sound. That was it. Now with something like the Boss Katana, you can decide what kind of amp sound do you want? How much distortion do you want? What kind of clean sound do you want? And it's all super easy and intuitive. So rather than going out of your mind trying to figure out the best amps, if you're just starting, get yourself one of these starter amps, practice on them, see what sounds you like, develop your ear, develop your sound, and then if you decide after all of that you want to upgrade to something else, you'll be able to speak to what you're looking for. Number 3, why do you want to play? So whenever I have a guitar student, the first thing I ask them is, why do you want to play? What's the point? Are you trying to be in a band? Do you want to pick up chicks, man? Do you want to sound like Jimmy Page? Maybe you love Lamb of God. It's important to understand your motivation for doing something, because not only does that determine what kind of guitar you get, because if you're playing metal, maybe you want to play something like this $200 Jackson Flying V. Maybe you do want to start on a Les Paul style guitar because that's what Jimmy Page played. So understanding why you want to play kind of helps you figure out, where are you going? What is the meaning of all this? What's the point? Are you trying to learn music? Is this just a hobby? Is this something that you're very serious about and you want to be a rock star? Those mindsets are very important to figure out ahead of time, so that when you start your journey on the guitar, that you know where you're starting from and also kind of have an idea of where you're going and why you're even making the trip in the first place. Which brings me to number 4, set yourself some goals. I'll go even one further, write it down. Just like Van Wilder, write that down. Because it's statistically true that there's a 50% higher chance of something happening if you simply just write it down. Knowing your goals and having goals is so important to starting anything. If you go start working out at the gym and you're 105 pounds, you're like, my goal is to get to 150 pounds and be jacked. You work towards that goal. You go in every day and you start doing all your exercises so that you can meet those goals. You can meet your own expectations versus just walking into a gym and going, oh, I'm just gonna lift things and hopefully things will happen and maybe It's important with anything that you set your mind to that you have goals. I want to be able to play Metallica Master of Puppets in 6 months. I want to be able to read music in a year. I want to be able to sweep pick. Doesn't matter what the goals are. It's important that you have them, you keep your eye on them, and that you work towards them. If you're starting to play an instrument, I'm going to assume you want to get good. And I guess if you don't want to get good, then none of this matters. And I guess this isn't for you, but if you have any interest in moving forward and you look at other players and go, how do they do that? 1 hour at a time. Which brings me to number 5. Practice makes better. They say it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert. 10,000 hours to be an expert at anything. So if you want to get good at the guitar, it's going to take some time. But I assure you, if you set yourself goals and you work out time to practice in your life, that you will find it rewarding. And if you don't, then don't play the guitar. Here's the thing, no one's forcing you. No one said, hey man, you got to play that guitar, you got to get as good as Eddie Van Halen. No one said that. You're choosing to. It's your money. It's your time. So if you do nothing with it, that's on you. Who cares? I don't care if you suck, if you spend $2,000 on a guitar to put in your closet. What I do care about is if you actually want to learn and get better, that you take the time to do that for yourself. It's not something you have to do. If you don't do your homework, you're not gonna fail out of guitar school. You're just not gonna get good. For all the people just starting out there, I hope this helped. I will quote the amazing Stephen Wright on this. I was told that practice makes perfect, but then in school, I was told that nobody's perfect, so I stopped practicing. Don't be Stephen Wright. Practice, and maybe you'll get to be half as hacky as me. Why don't you smash that subscribe button already? Thanks, guys.